want to make an impact? Just have a cup of... You want to make an impact? Just have a cup of our exceptional Laughing Man coffee. Want to make an impact? Just have a cup of our exceptional Laughing Man coffee.
Alright, can everyone hear me? Do a sound check here real quick. Alright, so I got one person who can hear me. Can everybody else hear me? I think we got the bugs worked out from last time. Alright. So we'll start at the top of the hour. Just settle in, grab a glass of iced tea or whatever you like, and we'll get going in a few minutes here. How's everybody's weekend been? Did anybody go anywhere on a trip? I was actually on Long Island yesterday. Long Island, New York. Well, I just took an epic slurp of cough syrup because I am battling the mother of all colds today. So hopefully I'm going to get through this without coughing and sneezing too much. You know what they say in the show business, the show must go on, right? So we're going to make the most out of this, and should be able to get through it all right. If you're hearing any ambient noise, that could be the fan for the laptop. Because the microphone would probably pick that up. Because the microphone would probably pick that up. Yeah, I think that's all you're hearing. Alright, so is everybody ready to go here? You want to get started? See how quickly we can knock this out. Got my tall mug of hot tea with lemon, so I'm ready to go. Let's do this. Alright, so as you all know by now, the Memorial Day weekend trip was a hugely productive one for the channel. I flew out to Columbus, Ohio on the Thursday and spent about half of my time in the St. Louis metro area and the other half in points south of St. Louis. And we're going to focus on those points south of St. Louis in this presentation, centered around the city of Memphis in Tennessee. So I had about a day or so to get everything documented. I'm not really happy with some of the stuff that I got. You know, that the Memphis stuff did show some signs of haste and relative sloppiness on my part. But I think it's all still good. You know, it'll, for the purposes of it being used as a resource, you know, just to see what the roads and bridges are like, it's perfectly fine. So we're going to give you a brief overview tonight of the freeways in Memphis and the surrounding area, and some of the stuff that I covered along the way. So these pictures on this cover screen here on this top left, we've got I-269 just over the Tennessee border. Right here, this in the upper right, this is the approach to the Memphis, Arkansas Bridge coming off of Crump Boulevard in Memphis. One of my favorite Mississippi River bridges is here on the bottom left, the Desoto Bridge, which carries I-40. And we have quite a major interchange here in the bottom right where I-40 and 240 intersect in Midtown Memphis. So Memphis is home to 4 mainline interstates. We have the 2 longest serving ones to date have been 40 and 55. Those were the only 2 in the city for a lot of years until the 21st century, really. The other 2 are relatively new. I-22, I believe, well, we'll talk about 22 briefly, but I think it was signed in Mississippi as recently as 2015 or something like that. And I-69, as we'll talk about later, is very much a work in progress through the Memphis area, whereas I-22 appears to have reached completion. And there are other 3-digit interstates in the area too. The 240 loop around Midtown, the 269 outer Beltway, which was just completed last fall, And we're also going to talk about a couple of other interstates further upriver that aren't in the Memphis area, but they're kind of in no man's land. So we'll touch on them briefly as part of this presentation as well. The two that we have selected here are quite significant additions to the interstate system. So we'll get into those as well. They're deserving of some attention tonight. So for those of you who are road enthusiasts, I'm sure you have seen a map of the city of Memphis before, so this will not be new to you, but for those of you who may not be so familiar, I'll run through some of the highlights for you. The two main interstates through the city are 40, which comes out of the west from Little Rock, and then goes across the Mississippi here at downtown, and exits off to the northeast in the direction of Nashville. 55 comes out of the south, out of Mississippi. There's quite a bit of suburban development in northern Mississippi related to Memphis. So it comes up through there, and then I'm sure we're going to touch on this in a little while, but it's got a weird transition to the Memphis-Arkansas Bridge at the south end of downtown before it exits off into Arkansas and heads northward towards St. Louis. The I-240 loop is in this area. It originally was a full loop, but we'll talk in due course about why I-40 takes a sudden turn to the left to go around Midtown Memphis. Yeah, we're gonna the infamous Crump Boulevard Cloverleaf is definitely going to be discussed here. Don't worry. So we've got the 240, and then the most recent addition to the interstate system in greater Memphis is the I-269 Beltway, which runs, it's more or less half of a full loop. It starts in Millington at US 51 and then ends down here at I-55 and I-69. And then the only section of 69 that is signed separate continues off to the west, and then we'll eventually head off to the southwest, and we'll get into some of the challenges involved in building 69 away from Memphis in a little bit. So here's the progression of the freeway construction process in Memphis. All these maps are not mine. These I got from other sites. I think you can get a lot of great maps off of sites like Interstate Guide and AA Roads. I think that's where I got most of these. So this is probably, like around 1960 or so. You see here, I-55 is largely in place or under construction. A lot of the 240 loop is in place. Notice how this section of the Midtown Loop is still part of 240. And also, it's hard to see here, but this is actually a 255 shield. So there obviously was a period of time where the western section, or the southwest corner of the Midtown Loop, was part of a different interstate number. And I-40 continues straight across town, which we know today doesn't happen. All right, there's an I-40 shield, and there's something called Overton Park, which we'll talk about, that played a big role in the interstate being rerouted. If we fast forward about 10 years, now the entire loop around Midtown is signed as 240. 40 again is a dotted line through Midtown around Overton Park, and 55 is in place and complete up into downtown and then exiting off into Arkansas. And if we fast forward again, this is like probably around 1990 or so. 40 has been rerouted to the north around town. The southern half of the loop is 240. And we're starting to see the first sections of what will ultimately become I-269 being constructed off to the northeast. and the rest of 269, for the purposes of this example, is shown in this dotted line here to Hernando, and then 69 picks up from there and heads to the southwest. So we showed you Metro Memphis. Now here's the north end of Highway 385. Here's Millington. So this is right, if you were looking at this map, this is basically the bottom edge of this map, right? So we're just going to go up a frame. See, Millington is now down here. So this gives you an idea of where we are now. I-555 is a relatively recent addition to the interstate system. It's a spur off of 55 in greater Memphis on up to Jonesboro, which is a sizable city. It's got an unusual feature to it for the span of about a few miles that we'll talk about. Makes it worth having a slide on. I-155 is up here. Pretty significant interstate, even though it's just a short spur over into Tennessee. It kind of looks on a map like it doesn't really lead anywhere, but it is a very important connection in the regional system. So, let's start getting into some of these. Why don't we just start on 155? That's a good place to start. So 155 begins in the Missouri boot heel and ends in Tennessee. It's the only highway to connect Missouri with Tennessee directly. It's about 27 miles long. It's about, I would say about 2/3 of its length is in Tennessee. About 10 miles of it is in Missouri. This highway is noteworthy because it forms part of the only corridor that crosses the Mississippi River between Cairo, Illinois, and Memphis, which is quite a significant distance. So having this bridge in place and as part of the interstate system provides an additional river crossing for local and regional traffic, and it provides additional redundancy in the overall transportation system, which, as engineers will tell you, we love having redundancy, right? We love having additional capacity, especially over such an important body of water as the Mississippi. Another thing about 155, currently it ends at US 51 in Dyersburg. If we ever get a serious case of divine intervention and I-69 is completed through Tennessee, 155 will actually be truncated by a few miles, and it will end at I-69. It will no longer end at US 51. But details on the exact location of this transition and this interchange and the timeline for construction of I-69 through northern Tennessee are still quite vague at this time. So that's like really long term for you to keep in mind of. 555, again, it's a spur connecting I-55 near West Memphis with Jonesboro, which is a pretty sizable town. I wasn't expecting it to be as big as it was when I was driving through. And in fact, this picture on the bottom left, I was surprised to see that the length of the interstate within the corporate limits of Jonesboro has overhead lighting on it. Now, I wasn't through here at night, so I don't know if it works or not, but I thought that was very surprising for an out-of-the-way community in the middle of Arkansas. Yeah, I don't know. Some of our older members of the audience, I'm not sure they will see 69 completed in their lifetime. I might be strolling around in a walker when that happens. Maybe. We'll see. But we'll talk more about 69 in a few minutes. The 555 spur is 50 miles long, roughly. It has an unusual feature in it for a few miles where it'll it's substandard technically by the rules of interstate, signage and standards and whatnot. Because there's no other way for farm equipment to traverse the spillways that the interstate crosses in this area south of Jonesboro. There's about a 4-mile stretch where an exemption was written into the law that signed the highway that allows, this equipment to traverse the highway. And we're talking like, heavy duty tractors and, I don't own a farm, so I don't know exactly what kind of equipment they would be talking about with this caution sign here, but you would probably see stuff like that on the highway, which is obviously not standard at all. So they put the exception in the rule because of the extenuating circumstance of not having another way to send this equipment up and down between the different farm properties. And so they made them happy, and they created an interesting oddity in the interstate system as a result. Really, it was the lights in Jonesboro were illuminated, huh? That's interesting. Like I said, out of the way, Jonesboro, Arkansas. That's not something that it's not something I would have expected. All right, so your warm-up was those two 3-digit numbers north of Memphis. So 40 is obviously a major cross-country highway. It begins on the Atlantic coast in Wilmington, North Carolina, and ends all the way out in Barstow, California. So it's about as close to cross-country as you can get without actually making it to the Pacific coast. It is the main interstate running east-west across Memphis. It has always been envisioned as such, and it has served that role amply since its inception. From a regional standpoint, it is key in connecting the Memphis area with urban areas east and west. So in the west, in Arkansas, you have Little Rock, and ultimately into Oklahoma. And then to the east, you have Nashville. And really, in connecting the state's two largest cities, Memphis and Nashville, I-40 is an economic lifeline for the state of Tennessee. Probably the most signature part of I-40 through Greater Memphis, by far, is going to be the bridge on the Mississippi River, which was one of the final links in the construction of the interstate across Greater Memphis. The bridge is named for Hernando Desoto, a Spanish explorer who was instrumental in exploring the Mississippi River Valley hundreds of years ago. People in Memphis they call it the M Bridge, and you wonder if that design is a not-so-subtle tribute to the city itself with the M shape of the superstructure. It's a neat little touch. Whether it's coincidental or not, I don't know, but it's a neat little, it's a neat feature. And then on the bottom right here, we have, if you're going west on 40 and you're intersecting 240, and these are some quite impressive flyover ramps here. So, and I think this project is relatively recent, like within the last 5 years or so. I gotta go back and look that up, but I knew there was a large interchange here, but I didn't know that they changed the layout of it. So that was quite impressive to drive, especially this flyover on the top level here, which carries I-40 eastbound. That's a tall flyover. That's got to be about 100 feet at its tallest point. Alright, so we know, if we went back to those maps that I showed you earlier, you know that I-40 was supposed to take a straight line shot through Midtown Memphis and come out the other side at that interchange that we just saw. The alignment of the freeway between downtown and the east end of Midtown was highly controversial. It would have required a cut and cover tunnel through Overton Park, which is one of the largest single green spaces within the city of Memphis. The alignment was, as I said, highly contested and ultimately was disapproved. As a result of this, I-40 was rerouted along the north leg of I-240, which was already under construction at the time. And the section of Sam Cooper Boulevard, which, if we go back a slide, it begins here, right, at this interchange, and continues on as a full freeway for a few miles into the city of Memphis, and then peters out as a freeway, and then ultimately comes to an end at this intersection in the lower left, which is a single T intersection at the entrance to Overton Park. This entire corridor is part of the legacy of the proposal to build I-40 straight across Midtown Memphis. And in fact, on the boulevard itself, you can see there's a sign here with a place for I-40, for an I-40 shield here, and the exits are numbered based on I-40 mileage, assuming the Midtown alignment was built. So that's why you've got exit numbers on Sam Cooper Boulevard. They were all leftovers from what was supposed to be I-40 mileage and exits. And I would not be surprised if there was an I-40 shield up here at one time or another, and then it got removed at some point later. Yeah, I don't know how old those signs are, but they're, compared to the other ones in the rest of the city, it would not surprise me if these were original to the construction of this section of the boulevard, which at the time was envisioned obviously as a part of the interstate. So it definitely makes sense that you would have an interstate shield here. As far as the rerouting of the interstate, it doesn't seem to have been that big of a mess as far as traffic. The north section of the Midtown Loop still appears to handle that traffic well enough. It just results in you taking quite an out-of-the-way trip to get around the north side of Midtown. But again, I don't think that the traffic is as big of a mess without this section. As we see in some other cities, there are unbuilt freeways and then traffic is a disaster in some parts of the city as a result of not constructing these links, but I don't think that is the case in this particular instance. So one section of the interstate system that was built to its entire plan was I-55, and I-55 runs a quite significant path across the country. It begins in the outskirts of New Orleans, runs up through Memphis, on through St. Louis, and ends in Chicago. So it is a major, trans-country highway for commerce and whatnot. Through Memphis, it enters the city at the Tennessee state line, coming out of the Mississippi suburbs, crosses paths with I-240 as you enter the Midtown Loop area, and then has this really goofy cloverleaf ramp at Crump Boulevard, which is the talk of people in the road enthusiast community alike. So the interstate here, it only spends about 12 miles in Tennessee, whereas I-40 spends, by the time you get out through Knoxville, it's over 400 miles or whatever. But you get your money's worth in these 12 miles. Over the course of that distance, of course, you pass Graceland, Elvis Presley Boulevard, that area. And you reach the entrance to downtown here. If you were to continue straight at this point, instead of curving onto the ramp to stay on 55, you would end up on Riverside Drive, which takes you right through downtown. So one of the things that has been talked about for years, as far as improving freeways in urban areas, particularly those in Memphis, is addressing the Crump Boulevard I-55 tangle. So what the leading candidate for a replacement for that job, you can see here, you can see the existing interchange on this satellite image, and then you've got the proposed alignments of certain things superimposed on top. So if we have a full cloverleaf right here, that's the status quo, right? So the main line for I-55, it then becomes taken up by this orange section here under this proposal. The ramps connecting into Crump Boulevard and Riverside Drive are marked out by the yellow lines. Local street access is in the light blue. That would be preserved. This is the more ambitious idea for replacing that cloverleaf layout. Project is currently held up because of lack of funding, supposedly. It's been delayed several times as it is. As a stopgap measure, what Tennessee DOT did was they actually closed this ramp in the southeast corner, this loop ramp here, which connects the bridge with Riverside Drive. So by eliminating this ramp and forcing traffic instead to turn left to utilize this movement, you've eliminated the need to merge in here. So you create more room for traffic staying on 55 to exit off. And, that seems to have helped a little bit with the traffic flow, because now you have a 2-lane ramp there that, you know, it's more functional when you're not having to fight traffic that's coming off the bridge at the same time. If these 2 lanes of traffic have their own space that's unimpeded, you know, in theory it can handle a lot more traffic than it already is, which seems to be playing out right now, at least in my experience with it. That said, this is a ridiculous layout, and we need to get our act together here with getting this flyover bypass built. Because this is just it's one of the more bizarre moments in the interstate system as a whole, where you have to exit off of a freeway at a cloverleaf interchange to stay on a mainline interstate. I don't know that there are many other examples of that around the country. But hopefully this doesn't stick around for that much longer. As far as I'm aware, the status of it is suspended and awaiting funding. So, like a lot of things, I mean, I-69 in Tennessee is up in the air because of the same problem, but I would think that they would fast-track this project before they would ever undertake any more work with I-69. So Memphis has 2 3-digit interstates. We got 240, which is the Midtown Loop. It was originally drawn up as a circular. I mean, the freeway exists in full as it is today. The entirety of that circle was meant to carry a single designation, but obviously with the rerouting of I-40 around the north side of Midtown, that doesn't happen anymore. But the freeway was built in its entirety as originally planned. And by the way, one of the interesting things about I-240 is that the exit numbers do not start at 1 or 0, owing to the fact that the route was planned as a complete circumferential highway. The Interstate 40 mileage is more or less the same as that section of the 240 mileage. So in other words, I-40 occupies exits 1 through 12 on the loop, and then 240 picks up and begins at exit 12 and runs clockwise back into downtown at exit 32. So you don't have a situation where I-240 exit numbers are mileage based. I guess they're mileage based on the original plan, which was to have 240 as a full circumferential route. But that doesn't happen in this case. Instead, the exit numbers begin at 12, which is a reflection of the 12 miles that were supposed to be occupied by 240 had 40 been routed straight across Midtown Memphis. So 240 is significant in that it's the most direct highway connecting downtown Memphis with Memphis Airport. Memphis, as some of you may know, is a major hub for FedEx. And when I did my driving tour of the Memphis Airport access road, I was thoroughly impressed with the rows and rows of FedEx cargo planes sitting on the tarmac there. It was very impressive. So as I said before, part of I-240 around the north side of Memphis was replaced with I-40. Depending on whether Tennessee DOT is ambitious enough, they may go ahead and sign another part of the loop as I-69 as well. This would be the western side of the loop. So from the I-55 interchange in the southwest up to north of the I-40 merge, north of downtown, that whole section would be I-69. In fact, let me go back to the map here. So we're talking about this area here. So 240 is signed in this area. We're talking about routing I-69 up this way, along the western side of the loop. And we'll talk more about 69 in just a second, but basically what would happen is 240 would be replaced with 69. That seems to be what's going to happen. There's conflicting information. Like, some people are saying it's going to be an overlap. Some people are saying it's going to be a replacement. So it's not really clear exactly how they're going to handle this. I mean, they may keep the 240 number, but just add a multiplex with I-69 in this area. But another source that I read said that 240 was being replaced with I-69. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. So we have a lot of time to think about that. All right, here's another recent addition to the interstate system. I-22 came into being this century, even though the idea of a freeway between Memphis and Birmingham is nothing new. I mean, it dates back to the years after World War II, in fact. But it wasn't really until the 1980s and 90s when work really got underway in improving the US 78 corridor across Alabama and Mississippi to the point where it could be considered for interstate inclusion. The final process of which concluded in 2015. So I-22 is now in place between I-65 north of downtown Birmingham and I-269 in the suburbs outside of Memphis. That's basically as far as the interstate is slated to continue. If you look at a map, you'll notice that US 78 continues to the Tennessee border as a full freeway. It's about another 12 miles or so. But Tennessee was not enthusiastic about building their section of US 78 into a freeway to connect at least as far up as I-240. So as a result, I-22 ends at I-269 because it has to end at another interstate. It can't just end at the state line. So had Tennessee been more aggressive in building their section of US 78 into a full freeway, then we probably would have seen I-22 enter Memphis proper. But as it is today, it ends about a dozen miles short of there. And I don't think there are any plans to extend 22 into Tennessee. Yeah, I think if you look at a map, if you look at the Lamar Avenue corridor, I think there were schemes that were put out about 15 years ago that may have... I remember reading something about some scheme that Tennessee had for upgrading Lamar Avenue into a freeway, but it was wildly expensive, and it's not the kind of thing that they could have just transplanted to a new alignment. So I tend to agree that it would have been a stretch to extend the interstate into Tennessee. So that's I-22, and by the way, I filmed about 5 miles of that. Because usually what happens, like when I add a new number to the catalog, I'm not really interested in getting every mile of it, necessarily, but it's good to have another number there, just to say that I drove a section of it. So in the case of I-22, I drove about 5 miles of it, turned around, and came back into Memphis, just to say that I have I-22 in the catalog. And yes, you did drive all of it, and I did watch that series, and it was a very fine production from you guys over at 504 Road Trips. You guys always do a great job. I want to talk about I-69 for a few minutes, because as an engineer, it's one of those things that is going to be... it's one of those things that's always going to be a current event, I think. If you're familiar with my work, you will already know that I've driven every mile of I-69 in the state of Texas, which is confined to the Houston metropolitan area. This trip saw me add every mile of I-69 in Mississippi and Tennessee to that catalog, which is very strange. You know, I have every mile of it in 3 states that, well, 2 of them are nowhere near each other, but they're fully signed, and the other state is completely unsigned. Hey, take it easy over there, Josh, will you? So anyway, the section of 69 that is signed is completely within the state of Mississippi. From outside of Tunica, running easterly on a new alignment to I-55, where it then multiplexes with I-55 and is signed as such on up to the Tennessee border. At that point, the 69 designation becomes unsigned. So, and again, it's a question of whether or not Tennessee wants to sign it, because at this point, there's nothing north of Memphis that's currently built out. So all they would really be doing is signing additional multiplexes, which may not be the smartest thing to do. It really would be counterproductive, if you ask me. So the idea here being that Tennessee is prepared to re-sign sections of Interstate 240, 55, and 40 as parts of I-69, provided that additional construction is completed north of town, which may not happen for many years. So the juxtaposition, as we talked about, it's signed in Mississippi very well, as you can see in the photo on the right, but it is completely unsigned in Tennessee. And I think there's one sign on I-40 westbound as you approach the 240 split near downtown. There's one of those really old future I-69 corridor signs posted there, like a sign that was like put up 20 years ago or something. That sign is still there. That's the only hint that you'll see of I-69 within Memphis proper. So let's say for a minute that everybody in Mississippi and Arkansas and Tennessee and Louisiana gets their act together and I-69 becomes a reality. Well, one of the biggest obstacles it has to overcome is the Mississippi River, and there has to be a bridge over the Mississippi River somewhere. The bridge location has been established. It's going to be somewhere north of Greenville, Mississippi, and across from Arkansas City, Arkansas. The dimensions of this bridge are going to be actually quite similar to the Stan Musial Bridge in St. Louis. So in a future webinar, I'm sure we'll talk about that bridge. But if you are interested in seeing the proportions of the bridge we're talking about, that's actually a really good model for the kind of bridge that would be built here for I-69. The bridge, as I said, the location of it has been established. It is awaiting the go-ahead as far as funding goes. And it's really been waiting on funding for the better part of 20 years now. So, will it happen? I mean, it's one of those things that it could happen, if all these states get on board tomorrow and say that they want it, then it could happen tomorrow, or it could wait another generation. It's one of those things that it's hard to tell exactly, what the future holds for the better part of the corridor between Kentucky and Texas. But if we ever did get a bridge built over the Mississippi north of Greenville for I-69, that would be a project that would certainly be worth following. And it would be worth me sneaking onto a plane down to Memphis to go check it out. So that's this picture in the lower left. That's the bridge on the Mississippi for I-69. Yeah, I don't know what the history of the Greenville Bridge is. I don't. They may not have settled on the alignment for 69 at that time, so not exactly sure how that played out. Yeah, so the I-69 corridor is envisioned as a single freeway connecting the Mexican border with the Canadian border. It's what they're calling the Canamex corridor. So, and when you consider the fact that so much of our nation's goods and services come up through Texas and have to make their way to the Midwest and the East Coast, the idea behind the construction of this interstate is that it provides another mechanism for goods and services to make their way up from Texas into the Midwest. And that was really the idea behind getting this project off the drawing board and into physical existence. There are significant sections of it already in place. I mean, in Texas, around the Houston area, I covered all of those miles of it. There's also down by the border, there's the I-69 E, C, and W spurs down by the border, which are connected by Interstate 2. Kentucky and Indiana have been very aggressive in recent years about completing their sections of the interstate south of Indianapolis and into western Kentucky. Yeah, I mean, we could bat that back and forth all night. You know, the idea of, is 69 really a justified highway in some of these areas, like in Mississippi and Louisiana and Texas. You know, I keep wondering about, you know, the bridge. You know, the bridge project, is that even going to be worth the while, worth the investment? There's talk of, you know, part of the I-69 alignment around Evansville, Indiana, as you mentioned, is going to involve a new bridge over the Ohio River, and that's a big project that kind of dead ends into nowhere. So, you know, it's part of an ongoing debate. You know, as far as, you know, do freeways in rural areas actually help prop up those rural areas, or do they just aid in the depopulation of those areas? You know, I'm not sure I want to get into that debate tonight, but it's definitely something to think about. Yeah, I would say the Autobahn Bridge is another one. That's another one. So one project that I think we can agree is not a pork project is I-269, the newest addition to the Memphis interstate system. It was completed in last fall. The last section of it in Mississippi was completed in, I think, October last year. It's been in various stages of construction since the 90s. Its signed length is 45 miles, although that distance is going to expand in the future. This is assuming that I-69 north of Memphis ever gets built. Because as the bypass ends right now, it ends at an intersection with US 51 in Millington. The freeway is planned to continue another mile or so past that intersection and ending at another interchange with I-69, and that would be the northern terminus of that interstate. The southern terminus is completely set in place. That ends at the I-55-69 junction outside of Hernando. So that interchange is complete. The suburbs in Mississippi and Tennessee have been growing by leaps and bounds in recent years, and so an outer loop to connect those suburbs with the main highways that intersect within Memphis was seen as a good idea. And it's an example of the roads getting out ahead of the inevitable development that is sure to follow. So having this highway in place as a bypass and as a connection for suburban communities in the outer ring outside of Memphis, to me is a good idea and is a good investment. Plus, it's a nice road to drive. You know, it was a very well built road. That's about all I got. We made it through the speaking part of this presentation without me having to cough or sneeze all that much. So, if you guys want to see anything in particular or talk about anything in particular, this time is yours. If you want to see any previews, any videos that I can pop up for you guys, leave some ideas in the chat. Otherwise, I might just pick some stuff. So the thing with the bridges, I didn't really talk about the bridges in this presentation, in large part because I think I'm going to do a separate one of these just for the bridges. Like a separate presentation where we spend some time going over the bridges and such like that. So from Memphis on up to St. Louis, there's quite a few of them. So you could spend, a good amount of time just discussing those. But, since you brought it up, I suppose we could start by rolling through some of these. I'll show you the trip over the Memphis, Arkansas bridge. And one of the things that is important to remember is that this is a pretty old bridge. It was built in 1949. Well before the years of modern interstate design and construction. So it does make you want to grip the steering wheel a little tighter when you cross it. Plus, it's not really up to modern seismic code, and as you may be aware from some of my posts on Facebook, this area of the country is actually part of earthquake country. Due to its proximity to the New Madrid fault system. So, a bridge like this, is really in the crosshairs of that. And we could spend an entire evening just talking about the seismic retrofitting that's gone on some of these bridges in recent years. That's really fascinating stuff. Like, you look at some of the designs nowadays and you think you were in California, but you're not. You're in Memphis. You're in St. Louis. You never think that areas like that would need to have, like, amped up seismic codes for their buildings and bridges, but that's exactly what they need because of their proximity to New Madrid. So you notice the Memphis, Arkansas bridge has 4 lanes, no shoulders. There's technically a sidewalk on the right here, but it leads to nowhere. And since the Harahan Bridge was reopened to pedestrian traffic a few years ago, there really hasn't been a need for pedestrians to access the Memphis, Arkansas bridge. Well, there's a place to pull over if there's an earthquake. It's called the river. You end up in the river if an earthquake hits when you're on that one. Let's see. This, by the way, gives you an idea to see what my cataloging system looks like for all my videos.
And to our digital life hack tip, and this week's brought to you by SimpliSafe.
So there are 2 entrances into Memphis, right? You've got I-55, which heads off to the right in this video across the Memphis, Arkansas Bridge to reach the southern end of downtown. And then there's I-40, which basically enters right into the city center. Crosses the M Bridge and then passes right through downtown on its way to the 240 interchange.
Even if you don't have a lot of valuables, there's no price you can put on your family's well-being. You need SimpliSafe. Period. SimpliSafe is wireless, it's portable, so if you move, it goes with you. There are no gotcha hidden fees. Once you order the system, it's yours with the option to pay the low $14.99 per month for 24/7 monitoring. There's no contract. That's right. SimpliSafe, they don't do contracts. You're not locked in with a security system that doesn't meet your needs for the next 3 years. SimpliSafe is also going to give you a 60-day money-back guarantee. You get free shipping.
This was a nice drive. I really enjoyed this entrance into the city.
In your home for 2 months.
And this is a video that will end up on YouTube at some point.
You can just return it. don't wait.
One of the
simplysafekim.com.
issues
At
with
simplysafekim.com. Once again, simplysafekim.com.
doing all this, video work is that it creates quite a long queue, quite a long list of stuff that I have to upload. So anything that was filmed on this trip is getting put right on the shelf immediately because I just don't have a timetable to upload it. 'Cause don't forget, we're still working through Hawaii stuff this month, and we've got California coming up this summer. So I would say it's reasonable to expect sometime in the fall to see some of this stuff. But I won't make any promises on that at this time. And plus I got another trip coming up at the end of this month too. That's going to really break the bank and add a lot of new footage. So, we'll just have to see what happens. I haven't really committed to anything as far as an upload schedule. So we'll just see how it all plays out. Yeah, that's why I don't upload in real time. Yeah, that would be, one of my favorite television commentators is a guy, you probably know the guy, Neil deGrasse Tyson. And whenever I read a question like that and I think of the answer, because my answer to that is, that would not go very well. I always try to channel him. So the question is, why don't you upload in real time if you're filming in real time? And my response to that while channeling him would be, that would be disastrous. So, or something to that effect, It just doesn't work. By the way, we're crossing the Mississippi on the Desoto Bridge right now. This is a beautiful bridge. On this trip, I was in the car 14 hours a day. So, and I got probably like 12 to 13 hours of tape. So, you're never going to see me upload 12 hours of tape in a day. So it just doesn't work. It's better to film a bunch of stuff at once and then have it in the catalog for later. I think I probably filmed about 4 months worth of material in 4 days. Just to give you an idea. But it's good, I'm in a very active period right now with filming new stuff and adding new cities and whatnot. And in a way it's really good because I don't know how long that's going to last. And I don't know how long this period of activity is going to last. So you want to have stuff in the bank for, in case there are lean times ahead. Which you never know. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to go on all these trips, but things could change very easily, and I might be in a situation where I wouldn't be able to travel as much. And it's good to have all this stuff saved away, so that I can share stuff with you even if I'm not able to travel as much. Everyone's asking about Michigan and when I'm going to do Michigan. To tell you the truth, Michigan was the original destination for Memorial Day weekend. I was originally going to go out to Detroit. And then when I took a look at all the construction projects that were going on in places like Detroit and Flint and Grand Rapids, basically all the interstates were going to be closed that weekend because of construction. I decided that Michigan was not such a good place to go after all. So I didn't, St. Louis and Memphis were cities that I was thinking about, but I didn't think that I would get to do them as early as I did. Like, these two cities were more like originally in the plan for next year and the year after. But, I had a slot open because Michigan wasn't going to work, and I was able to slot them in. And, Michigan's an interesting state that I would definitely like to see more of. So, I don't know. We'll see. And it's not like I can, it's not like Michigan's that hard for me to get to, because my local airport runs an express connection flight to Wayne County. So I could be in Detroit in under 2 hours by plane. So it certainly would be easy for me to get there if I ever decided I wanted to go there. So I showed you the two bridges in Memphis. I'll show you real quick the I-155 bridge up by Dyersburg, Tennessee, which, as I said before, is the only bridge across the Mississippi connecting either bank between Memphis and Cairo, which I don't know exactly how many miles that is. It's got to be at least 100. Like 150 maybe? 150 miles of river or something like that. So this bridge is very important to regional commerce. And it happens to lie right in the midst of the New Madrid fault system. So this is an interesting bridge. It's got a single tower, and it's asymmetrical as far as the superstructure. There's no other bridge on the Mississippi that I'm aware of that's quite like it. And that's it. It's a neat little bridge. One of the problems with this trip was I came at a period when the Mississippi was well above flood stage. So all the pictures that I wanted to get of the bridges, I couldn't really get because all the viewing areas were underwater. So there was an area that I wanted to explore that I could get a good picture of that bridge, but I couldn't because the approach to it was flooded. Oh yeah, that is true. That bridge outside Cincinnati has a weird design to it also. It's another bridge I've been over. So I'm just going to run this video in the background. This is I-40 eastbound through Memphis. If anybody has any questions about, Memphis or the video work I did or anything else, you can feel free to ask. I mean, it's 8 o'clock now in the east. I've basically done everything I wanted to do with this live stream, so it's really up to you guys what you want to see. I can keep the stream going for another little while or so. The time is yours, basically. Decide what you want to see, what you want to talk about. But let's keep it related to Memphis. I know that you guys are eager to see some St. Louis stuff and all that. Obviously, that was a major part of the Memorial Day weekend trip. But I am planning another webinar where we discuss St. Louis in depth. And then there's probably going to be another webinar devoted exclusively to the Mississippi River bridges. So after this one is done, we'll have hopefully 2 more after that. And that'll be the webinars for this trip. And then before you know it, I'll be planning webinars for the trip I'm taking at the end of June. You know, I did post video of the Cairo Bridges on my Facebook page. Those of you who are followers of that, I'm sure you probably have already seen that. But you know what? That we can show you those. It's not really Memphis, but it's not St. Louis either. It's kind of in a black hole. So let's see. So Cairo is a fascinating town. It sits at the confluence of the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, which is the historic dividing line between what they call the upper Mississippi and the lower Mississippi River. So Cairo was always strategically important as an economic center, and General Grant's army actually occupied Cairo in the very early stages of the Civil War, because General Grant, before people knew who he was nationally, already understood the importance of the Mississippi River as a strategic mode of transport for the Union. And so he made sure to secure areas of the river, such as Cairo, in order to protect the transport of Union goods and services. And we're on US 51 right now in this video, heading southbound into the village of Cairo itself. Let me skip this part. This is a neat little entrance into the village itself. Cairo has a population of just shy of 3,000 people. It used to have a population of over 20,000. It was a very significant river town back in the day. But now it's on the verge, really, of becoming a ghost town. Yet it's still a really interesting place to explore. So if you guys are... I know some of you in the audience are really into urban exploration and stuff like that. Cairo, Illinois would be a great place for you to check out on those lines, if you ever were in the area. There's a little VFW post on the right. And as I said, this is a video that will make it onto YouTube. This was a weird intersection. Here, let me back up for a second. This is an intersection that threw me for a loop, because watch what happens. The road divides, and then you've got turning traffic in the median, and then you do a switchback to the left, and then you rejoin the undivided highway. That's a very odd setup. Well, you know what? The traffic is probably light enough today that you could put a rotary there and it would work. This is more of the downtown area of Cairo. A lot of old buildings here still. A lot of places, if you dare to turn off the main street and go down some of these sketchy side streets, there's a lot of stuff that I'm sure you would enjoy seeing. So then we leave the town to the south. We basically climb the flood wall here. That's what this is up ahead here. And then we come to the intersection with US routes 51, 60, and 62, as we're at the southernmost point of Illinois. And there's only 2 ways off of Illinois at this point, and they both involve bridges. So let's, I want to watch this one. We stay west on US 60 and 62. This is the bridge that crosses the Mississippi. That takes you back into Missouri. All these 2 bridges that we're going to see are 2 lanes. They're narrow. There's no shoulders involved. Can get a little nerve-wracking if there's a tractor trailer coming at you who's riding over the yellow line. It's interesting. But, you know, these are old bridges, but they're very cool at the same time. So that's this one. Roughly mid-span is where the state line with Missouri is. It's got the color of that bridge on the St. Lawrence River up in Quebec. Yeah, these lanes are like 9 or 10 feet. Something like that. Wouldn't want to be on that bridge when that big truck was going by. You know what? Let's watch this one. So originating from the same intersection, if you want to go east on 60 into Kentucky, you cross the bridge that goes over the Ohio River. And directly across from the intersection of these 3 U.S. routes is Fort Defiance, which is the actual point of confluence between the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. And it's at Fort Defiance where General Grant established a camp and a base for his Union troops to secure the upper Mississippi and the entire Ohio River for Union travel during the Civil War. And this happened very early on. I think it was within 2 weeks of the bombardment of Fort Sumter. This is another narrow cantilever truss bridge. This one's not nearly as in good a shape as the one we were just on, the one that goes over the Mississippi. Yeah, you gotta pay attention when you come off this bridge because you get a sharp curve to the right as you touch down in Kentucky. When I posted on my Facebook page that I was in Kentucky, I there's the asterisk there that I was in Kentucky for a grand total of about 3 minutes, because I turned around on US 51 just up ahead so I could go back over the bridge into Illinois. That was the only time I was ever in Kentucky on the trip. Though in recent months I've spent a lot more time in Kentucky doing some video stuff. I was in Louisville around New Year's. That was a fun city to do. A lot of neat bridges in Louisville. And then lastly, as far as bridges in the Cairo area, this is the I-57 bridge, which is the newer of the three. It's the only of the three that has more than 2 lanes. At the time I crossed it northbound, they had a lane closed for some reason. I'm not sure exactly what they were doing. But traffic is light enough through here that it didn't really make much of a difference. This is a neat combination truss / arch concoction. You're right. It does kind of bear some resemblance to the Key Bridge in Baltimore. That is true. They're kind of cut from the same cloth. Though I like the one in Baltimore a lot better. And this one definitely needs a paint job. So yeah, we'll talk more about the bridges at St. Louis when we get to do our presentation on St. Louis. But I did cross all the bridges on the Mississippi up that way that I could that were open. The MLK Bridge is currently closed for some large-scale project that's been ongoing for a period of time now. So that's the only bridge on the Mississippi that I did not get to cross during this trip. But, it's not a bridge that I couldn't easily revisit in the future. Alright, so that's I-57. Let's see. I usually don't film this late in the day. Just because the sun angle starts to kind of mess with the quality eventually. And usually around 6 o'clock in the evening on a summer day I'm having dinner. But I got into Memphis in the late afternoon, and I decided I would try to kind of knock some stuff out of the way while there was still ample daylight, so I would have less to do the following morning. So one of the things I did in the late afternoon was I-55 through Tennessee and Mississippi. As you see here, the layout of the interstate here is very similar to a lot of the interstates you see in Nashville. If you guys watched my Nashville series, you'll see that you've got your 3 general use lanes, plus your left lane is reserved for HOV vehicles during peak hours. So it's striped a little bit differently than the other lanes. Actually, you know what? If you opened up this video and you told me, and you didn't tell me where it was, I would probably tell you it was Nashville, because it looks just like something you would see on I-65 or I-24 in that general area. This seems to be the default design that Tennessee DOT gravitates towards. I did get a question about radio stations recently, and I'm gonna give you guys a heads up. There's really not a whole lot to choose from in Memphis. I filmed the majority of the stuff that will make it onto YouTube on Sunday mornings. So basically, all the stations in Memphis are tuned to gospel and religious stuff. There's not a full-time news station in Memphis. So a lot of the videos in Memphis will be dark as far as audio. There won't be anything on in the background. You'll just be hearing the ambient noise from the car. I did make a point to kind of include some of that religious stuff in the background because, after all, we are in the Mid-South. Memphis is, one of the largest cities in the Bible Belt. So I felt that it was important to kind of include some of that stuff to provide some cultural context to the proceedings. But I didn't go overboard with it either. No, I did not pick up 10-10 wins. I'm sorry. I did not get good reception. I could have streamed it online with my phone if I wanted to, but one of the reasons why I go on these trips is that I try to get away from New York and try to get away from all that stuff. So the last thing I want to do is put on stations that I'm already familiar with. Let's see. So that was 55 north, leading away from the Mississippi border into the 240 interchange. Let's see. I'll show you guys some of I-269 while I have it up here. As I said, 269 is the newest addition to the interstate system around Memphis, and the newest section of it opened just a few months ago, less than a year ago. Yeah, I'll give you guys a little bit of a teaser. So when I was in St. Louis, the station I listened to most frequently was KMOX, which is their news and talk station. They're also the home of the St. Louis Cardinals, so that's a bit of a sentimental pick on my part because my dad is a avid St. Louis Cardinals baseball fan. And actually right now, because the Stanley Cup Finals are in St. Louis, KMOX has switched over to covering the Blues full-time during the Stanley Cup Finals. So the Cardinals are actually being booted to a sister station for the next week or so, whenever there's a broadcast conflict. Because I guess that's the way that their contract is written. Like, the St. Louis Blues have their own station, but in the event that they were ever able to play in the Stanley Cup Final, they would move over to KMOX, which would then boot the Cardinals off of their quote-unquote home station over to a different station for, a short period of time, which is interesting. So anyway, I had KMOX news on the air most of the time during the St. Louis video series. I like that station a lot more than any of the other stations that I listen to down in the Memphis area. By the way, we've just crossed the state line into Mississippi. This first exit here is for the town of Olive Branch, Mississippi, which those of you who are really big into NASCAR may already be aware of, that this is the hometown of driver Ricky Stenhouse Jr., which I didn't really make that connection until this afternoon when his name popped up on the broadcast and they showed his name as Olive Branch, Mississippi, and I'm like, well, wait a second, that sounds familiar. That sounds like sounds like the name of a town I was just in not that long ago. And sure enough, it's got its own exit off of I-269 now.
At the time, believe it or not, they were all health code violations, so they weren't even really criminal. You know how hard it is to make somebody go to jail on a, health code violation. It's almost impossible. It's mostly based on fines.
I was able to pick up KMOX at night in Memphis. I think during the daytime I lost the signal around whatever town I-155 meets I-55 in. So like down in the boot heel, that's where I lost the signal going south. And then going east-west on 70, I lost the signal more or less at the Illinois border. So about 150 miles in any direction, I had at least a little bit of a signal. Hey Deacon, thanks for coming and joining us tonight. Yeah, the Illinois-Indiana border. That's right. Yep.
12 years in jail, and all of a sudden now that's very expensive. It's very expensive to put someone in jail. For the DM break.
I do know that segment of I-69, and you know what? Since you asked about it, I'll show it to you. So this is the segment of 69 that branches off to the west from I-55 to head towards Tunica, and ultimately, many years from now, will be the approach to a new Mississippi River bridge over into Arkansas. This is a weird setup. It basically exits off of itself here at Highway 304. And there's this really long and curvy roundabout ramp that's technically part of the mainline I-69 freeway. So we cross over 304 here. And then this part of the freeway is still interstate. The interstate as of right now ends at the Tunica County line. So in about a mile or so, well, you'll see here's a reassurance shield on the right. So this is still interstate. I think that's a mile 1 marker right there. Mile 0 is more or less at the county line. So they built this section, to full interstate standard, and then the freeway ends here as we go around this curve. And then shortly after this point, the road narrows down to an undivided road with intersections and traffic signals. So here's the end I-69 sign, and here's the entrance to Tunica County. So from here on out, on down to US 61, this is State Highway 713 the rest of the way. And I kept the camera going for a little while after the end because I wanted to see exactly where the first intersection was. Because even though the designation has officially ended, we're still on what you could consider a freeway grade highway. Is there any reason in particular why the casinos are where they are in the Tunica area? Like, does anybody here know the history of that? That was one thing that I was curious about. Because I know there are casinos in this area, but I don't know why they're in this area as opposed to somewhere else. Yeah, so then this, like if you were to go around this curve, like here's an intersection here, and then if you go off to the southwest, the road narrows down and you have cross streets, and there's a couple of traffic signals on the way to US 61, which is a few miles from the end of this video. Oh, is that how it works? It's legalized by county? I didn't know that. Because when you look at it on a map, Tunica is kind of in the middle of nowhere. You know, it's not even really in metropolitan Memphis. It's a good distance outside of there, so it just seemed like a random place to put a bunch of casinos. Alright, so is there anything else anything wants to see from the Memphis area? Oh, here's just going through the comments here. Yeah, so there's one other thing from Memphis I can show you. So what let me see. Alright, so I-69, if and when it is eventually signed through Memphis, it'll continue north on I-40, and then it will branch off here at this interchange, which is currently signed as US 51. But this will eventually be the main line for I-69 northbound. They built this interchange, I assume, with the provision of it being part of the interstate system eventually. But as of right now, it doesn't really lead anywhere. It just leads to another intersection with US 51, and then it ends. So we're on a section of highway right now which is signed as State Highway 300. At least, I think it's unsigned as Route 300. But it is part of the future I-69 main line. And there's exactly one interchange on it, and that's at its northern or western terminus, which is US 51. And you will be able to see there are some stubs on the left for an eventual southbound roadway. And where we take this loop ramp, you'll see that the pavement actually continues beyond where we curve off to the right. So, this interchange was built with a future extension of the interstate to the north and east in mind.
Are you more than $10,000 in debt? Feel like you're on a never-ending treadmill, staying in one place and never getting ahead with those minimum payments? You feel like there's no way out? Don't let the credit card companies bully you anymore. There are programs in place to help you get free of your debt, and you don't have to pay the entire amount you owe.
Yep, and then this, and so the connector dumps you off on this street here, and that's it. I'm gonna have to look into this Tunica place more, because it's sounding a lot more interesting now that you guys are talking about it. I'm gonna have to look that up. Alright, so that's basically it. I think I'm gonna wrap this up. It's been great to chat with you guys and recap the freeways of Memphis that I got to drive and document for all of you. As I said before, there's no timeline for any of these uploads to make their way onto YouTube, so it's one of those things where we'll just play it by ear and we'll see where we're at late in the summer, and then we'll take it from there. But obviously, you know, Memphis is just one city that I did. I also did St. Louis, and we'll probably get into St. Louis next time. So, I want to thank all you guys for joining me and contributing to the conversation. And keep an eye out for another webinar on St. Louis. If I am motivated enough to do one, we may do it next weekend. And then maybe we'll do a Bridges webinar after that. So, there's a lot going on the channel. You know, between the webinars and the ongoing daily uploads from Hawaii, which will be going on for at least a couple more weeks. Probably another 3 weeks at this rate. And then once that's done, we move into California. So, be good to get back to the continent, finally. So with that, I want to thank you guys for coming out. And if you have any other questions about Memphis or the highways of Memphis, drop them in the comments section of this video once it's processed and published. And I'll be happy to answer them for you there. So until then, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'm sure we'll be talking to each other real soon. Take it easy.